Hi, in this video we are going to create a little to-do app. This to-do app will utilize Node.js, Express, MongoDB, and Mongoose. So let's talk about this for a minute. We will create new to-dos just by typing in this box. Create more Mongoose videos. That's a good one. I'm going to add it. As you can see, it's been added. Here's the to-do text. Here is whether it's done or not, and I can mark it as done. I can refresh the page. This has been saved to the database. If I click done, it gets moved down to the done list. If I didn't really finish it, I can hit whoops. It'll go back up, and I can even add more to-dos. Mark it as done. Mark everything as done. And as you can see, this all works. This is what we're going to build. Let's get started. Okay, so we want to create a to-dos app. First thing we need to do is create a folder. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to call this Mongoose Express to do. If we go into that folder, now we can go ahead and create our Node.js application. First thing we need to do is do an npm init, and I like to use the -y option because that just lets everything get answered as yes or enter, and we're done. If we do an ls, you can see that we now have a package.json file. Okay, next, let's go ahead and make this a Git repository by doing a git init. Now we have an empty Git repository. And then finally, we need to make sure that our node modules folder is ignored. So one way I like to do that is by echoing out node modules and redirect it into a git ignore file. There we go. If I do an ls -al, we should see everything as it should be. Now, let's open this up in Atom. Okay. Now, if we look at the project, you'll see that we have the normal files. We have a package.json. We have a git ignore with the node modules, which we created earlier. The only thing that we're missing now is some very important dependencies that we need to go ahead and install. So to do that, let's jump back over to our console and let's run an npm install. And all of these you have seen except for one. So we'll start with Express, then we'll get body parser. We need mustache Express for our views, and then Mongoose. Be sure to use the --save option because this will be what writes it out to your package.json file. So now if I press enter, everything is installed. Cool. All right, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and add a server.js file. And then let's go ahead and get a rudimentary server working. So to do that, I'm just going to say const express. Let's require express. Then for our view engine, we're using mustache express. So I will bring in mustache express. Also, we are going to need body parser because we're going to have a form and we're going to need to be able to receive the input from that form, and that's what body parser does. There we go. And last but not least, since we are going to use Mongoose, I'm going to go ahead and bring it in. All right. Now, let's go ahead and do a few things just to get everything up and running. First thing we'll do is create our Express app. Then we're going to tell it to use body parser to look for URL encoded forms. And I'm going to set extended to true. Then, after that, let's set up our view engine. And there's a reason I am doing this like this. When I do it this way, what's going to happen is that I will be able to come down here and say cache equals null, and that will mean that during development I can modify our mustache templates without having to restart the entire server. So let's go ahead and tell it. Let's go ahead and tell it that mustache is our view engine. We'll pass in that instance that we just created. Then we will set the view engine extension to mustache. Now what this does is it's saying that for the view engine, any files with a mustache extension will be considered a template. And we'll see more of this in a little bit. And then last for this part, I am going to set views. And this is going to be in the current folder, views folder. So after doing this, it's probably a good idea that I come over here and say that I want to create a new folder. We'll call it views. So now we have a views folder. Let's see. Let's create a example route just to make sure that everything will be hooked up. So I'm going to do an app get at slash, and then we will return, or we'll pass in a function, request, response. We'll do a res.send hello. Then, in order to get everything running, I'm going to say app.listen 3000, pass in a function, and let people know that it worked. All right, let's go back over to our console. I'm going to clear it real quick and then start NodeMon. NodeMon's really cool because it will continuously monitor for any JavaScript file changes and restart the server if we do make any. All right, it says it's listening. That means that all of that code we just ran is good. Let's go to localhost 3000, and I'm getting back a hello. Okay, so we have a rudimentary server set up. Let's continue. Okay, so now that we have all of this set up, let's make sure that our views work. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to my views folder and say that I want a new file. I'm going to call this index.mustache. Now remember, in our server file where I said that we were specifying the file extension right here, view engine mustache. That's why I called this file index.mustache. Let's go ahead and make this a valid HTML document. Like so. I'm going to call this Just call this to-dos for now. And I'm going to come down here to the body and do an H1 where I will just say stuff I need to do. Okay, over on my server, instead of sending back hello, let's get rid of that and say that we want to send back or render index. And right now I'll just pass in an empty object. Okay. Still listening? Very good. Let's refresh. All right, stuff I need to do. Title is fine, everything looks good. We are good to go with mustache. Okay, next we need to go ahead and create a few things. So in order to create a new to-do, I'm going to need a form, of course. And this is just as simple as form. I'm going to get rid of that for now. The action is going to go to /to-dos, and the method is going to be post. And then in here, I need an input. The type is going to be text, and the name, I'm just going to call this description. Okay. And then also we're going to need a button. Type is going to be submit. Going to put the word add inside there and close off my button, just like that. Okay, let's go over to our page, refresh, and there is our form. Very cool. Okay, now let's try to create a to-do. Create more Mongoose videos. Ooh, cannot post the to-dos. Whatever shall I do? I'll tell you what we shall do. We need to create a route. So let's go into our server.js file. And I am going to do a new post route to to-dos. We'll pass in a function, request, response, and I am just going to send back down what we sent up, just to be sure that everything is hooked up the way that I think it should be. So I'm going to say rec.body, because body parser is going to put everything from the form into the body property of the request. Let me save this. I'm going to go back to our main page, refresh, and I get back JSON of what we sent up. Excellent. As you can see, it said description. It's exactly what we named it, which is description. All right, we're getting closer. Now, all we need to do is figure out how to talk to the database, because I'm sending a form up. I needed to do this thing and preferably add a to-do to the database. So let's go ahead and create what we are going to call a Mongoose model. And to do this, I want to create a new folder. I'm going to call this folder models. And in the models folder, I'm going to add to-do.js. This will store our new model. And I need to do a few things. First, I need to bring in Mongoose. Then I need to take from Mongoose an object called schema, and I will just call this schema. Be sure that both of these letters, both of these S's are capitalized in this case. It is extremely important. Also, what we want to do now is create a schema. Now let's talk about schema for a minute. A schema is just a way to describe the document that we're going to send to Mongo. So let me show you what that means. Let to do schema equals new schema. We already know that I'm going to have a description property, and schema just takes in an object that describes what's going to be sent to it. So let me just do this, description, and description is going to be of type string, and there's a lot of these, so let's kind of pay attention to this for a second. Description is the name of the property, and string is the type. And so what will happen is that we are saying to Mongoose, be expecting a description property, and that is of type string. Also, I'm going to create a done property and assign it or tell it that its type is a Boolean. So that's a typical to do. Description, string, whether it's done or not, it's true or false, that's a Boolean. Cool. And then the final thing we need to do in this file is export it. So we can say module.exports, Mongoose. We will use the model method on Mongoose. It is a to-do, and then we will give it the object that we just created, the to-do schema. Save that. So we now have a model. It is being exported, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the model. So the schema basically says this is what it's going to look like. When we say, hey Mongoose, create a model, the model is going to do a lot more. So the model gives us a way of querying for data, it gives us a way of updating data, it gives us a way of removing data. It does a lot. So this is actually very important. This line right here is extremely important. Okay, so let's move on. Let's go to the next thing that we need to do. So we have this the to-dos route. And what we need to do at this point is create a new to-do. But how do we do that? Well, the first thing that I'd like to do, because this is going to get a little out of hand very fast, is I want to get our routes out of my server.js file. And to do that, I'm just going to come over and create a new folder. I'm going to call it routes. And then I'm going to add a file into routes called routes.js. And then in that routes file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a router from Express. So I'm just going to say require Express, and hey, give me your router. Then we just created a model. I can actually go get this model now. Let me just call it to do. And I will require it. Now, let's talk about this for a minute. I am sitting in the /routes folder, and my model is sitting one folder up and in the models folder. So I need to go up one folder into my models folder and grab to do. Now, Let's go get our router. Let's go get our routes. Just going to take these two guys out. Cut. Go into routes.js. I'm going to paste them in there. And now this, of course, I can't use the name app because it doesn't exist here, but I will just say router. And the last thing I need to do to make this work is export that router. And then in my server.js file, where I once had those routes, we just need to say app.use /routes. Ooh, but I forgot one important thing. I need to actually include those routes. I need to require them. So I'm going to come up to here and say const routes equals require. And now this is in the same folder. I'm going to go into the routes folder and grab the routes file. Let's see. Okay, that looks good. So at root, grab this router. That should work. Let's make sure that everything still works. As of right now, I am still listening. As I was working on stuff, I did actually do some things that made it very upset, but it is listening. Let's try doing a refresh on the index page. Everything's still working. We have moved the routes. Now with our router sitting in its own file, let's start doing some interesting things. So let's talk about this post for a second. What I want to do is I want to use, first of all, I'm going to get rid of that res.json just so we don't have any confusion about it hanging around. What I want to do is take what came in the body. So I'm going to create a new to-do. I'm going to use the new keyword with our model. There's a reason why that model had a capital letter. Conventionally, anything that we use the new keyword with will have a capital letter as its first letter. And I'm just going to say that the description is equal to the request.body description. This is going to give me a new to-do that I can then use with Mongoose to create a new to-do in the database. Now, if you've been watching, you're probably screaming and yelling, hey, wait a minute, you can't do anything because you haven't seen me connect to the database at all. And that would be very true. So before we do anything else, I want to go back over into our server.js file and connect to the database. So let's do that real quick. So we have Mongoose. Let me do a connect. And the URL is just mongodb localhost. And of course, I'm assuming that everyone is running on the default port. I called my database Mongoose Express to-dos. And yeah, this part's a little bit confusing, but I need to pass in use Mongo client to true, because if I don't, it's going to just scream and yell about deprecation warnings. So interestingly enough, I can come in and this is going to give me a promise. And if you remember, a promise is just something that is going to give us a value later. The connect works just the same way. I can say then pass in a function, and if this works, then I can just log out database connected. This just means that if we are looking at the console, come back out here and it will say database connected. But oh wait, I'm getting a deprecation warning again. mPromise. So mPromise is a built-in promise library into Mongoose, but they don't need it anymore because Node.js comes with ES6 promises. So let's go ahead and bring that in real quick too while we're talking about it. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to just say mongoose dot promise equals the global promise. So if I save that, come back, you can see that there are no more deprecation warnings. And that the database is connected. So we're in good shape. Database is connected. All of the stuff I'm working on should work. So let's go back into our routes for a second. So we're creating a new to-do. We got the description from the body. Now, all we have to do to save this to the database is the following. New to do dot save. Now again, save returns as a promise, and as before, all we have to do to then get if it worked or not is using the then method. We'll pass in a function. What we get back will be the new to do. We may not really need to do anything with it at this point, but it will be there. So I'm just going to say result, and I can console log out the result. See if this works. First of all, let's make sure that our code's still running. It is. That's great. And what happens if I try to add something? It's hanging. Of course it's hanging. We didn't actually tell it to do anything after we submitted. You'll notice all we're doing is this console log. So I need to come in here and say, I just wanted to redirect. So res.redirect to here. That's all I wanted to do for now. And now if I come in here and refresh, server is going to be back up. Let's go back to the index page, and I'm going to type in test. I'm going to hit add. And of course, nothing happens. We're not listing any to-dos or doing anything, but let's see if we actually got a to-do in the database. So if I come over here to my MongoDB compass and I hit refresh, there is a new database here. Let me click on that. It does actually say there are 2 documents, and both of my tests are in the database. Excellent. Okay, so now we are able to insert, but we're missing a very important feature, which is the ability to actually list them. So let's work on that. Let's work on that. First thing we need to do is query for them. And the way that we'll do that is like this. Remember, this is our model. The model is going to provide us a lot of functionality out of the box. One of those bits of functionality is the find function. So if I say to do dot find and pass it in an empty object, that means give me everything that you've got. then it returns us back a promise, and this promise will give us all the results if any are found. So let's just type this out. So I'm just passing in a function that's going to take in the results. Now if I run this, nothing is going to happen because again, I am just passing in an empty object. If I want to actually get these objects or get the results into this, I'm going to pass in an object with the property to-dos on it and pass the results to it. So this is an object. It's got a property of to-dos and it's taking in the results. So let me save that. Let's make sure that everything's still running. Database is connected. Everything's good. And let's go back to our browser and nothing's changed because our template hasn't changed. So let's go to our template. Let's go to our mustache template. And I'm going to create a section. It's going to look at the to-dos property. And for each one of these to-dos, let's print out the description. Now, this is just going to smash them all together, so I want to give it some markup that's going to make a little bit more sense. So let's use a unordered list. Close that. I'm going to stick this code inside there. And then I'm going to create a list item with the description. Close that list item off. If you remember, we have two properties, description and done. I'm just going to put both of them here. There's description, there is done. Let me save this and let's refresh. Hey, check it out. If we go and look at Compass, I've got two documents. One has got a capital T test, one has got a lower t test as the description. Now, one thing I want you to notice how it's blank over here? Like I put whether or not it's done, and you know it's a Boolean, so true and false. Well, it didn't actually go up into the database. Well, that's not good. So let's fix that. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and remove the ones that I've created. If I refresh my page, nothing shows up. That's legitimate. And what I want to talk about is default values. So before, you've seen this to-do schema. It's saying basically I'm expecting a property of description and it's going to be a string, and then it says I'm expecting done and it's going to be of type Boolean. Well, we can create what is called a default value. And so this is just shorthand. So just the fact that we have string and Boolean in here, that is shorthand. But I can make done have the value of an object, still say that the type is Boolean, but then I have another option called default, and I can default it to false. So now I have defaulted the value of done to false. I can go back over into my page and add a new to-do. Call this one create more Mongoose videos. And now I have the description and whether and the default of false. And to show you that it has been sent to the database, there it is. Nowhere in my form am I talking about false. Nowhere in my code am I talking about done as false. Mongoose is handling that by setting a default value for me. Okay, so a default of false for done is being sent to the database. But I realized that we may have another problem. So let's go back over to our page and let's go back to the index. And if I try to add a to-do without specifying a description, what happens? Ooh, we get a to-do without a description in the database. And to prove that it's actually there, let me refresh. Description is empty. And done is false. Well, this really doesn't help much because if I hit the add button accidentally 5 or 6 times, then we've got bad data. Well, the good news is that Mongoose has built-in capabilities to make sure that the data that's about to go to the database is valid, and one of those validations is required. So let's implement that. Well, here at description, I can change this out for an object, just like we did with done. And of course, I will still call this a string because it is a string. But there's another property called required. And if I set that to true, now we will not be able to send in a new to-do without specifying a description. Now let's make sure everything's still running. Yes, everything is. I'm connected. Database is connected. Everything is good. So now let's go back over to our page. If I refresh, everything still works. Now let's try adding that blank to do. Ooh, it is hanging. So what this means is that we're not sending a response back. Something has happened. It did not go down the then path. And now it is hanging. Now what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Well, I simply mean that if we look at our routes file and we look at the post for the to-dos, you'll notice that I say new to-do .save then, and then if everything is great, it sends me back to the index of the site. Well, we didn't come in to here because there was an error. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, it'd be nice to know that there was an error, and there's a way to do this. Just like we used then, there is the catch function on a promise, and this will be what is called if anything occurs that is an error. So we just pass in a function that will take the error, and I'm just going to log the error so that we can see it. But then also, I want to do a redirect back to slash, just so we don't break anything. So the site keeps running, because it should. So let me save that. Let's go back over to my page, and let's go back to the index of the site. If I refresh again, of course, everything is still there. Now, if I try to hit add, it just comes back. It doesn't actually add anything, but it's not hanging anymore. That's a good thing. Now, in a future video, I might go over what the best way to message the user or to show the user that there was an error. But this is just to show that Mongoose has the ability to validate a document before it allows it into the database. So that's pretty much it for required. This is really cool because this means that no matter what validations you have from some other library, you can always say in your schema what you're willing to accept or not accept, and it will stop before it ever gets to the database. So now that we are validating that a description is coming in, let's go ahead and blow away that bad to do. So I'm going to hit delete. It's gone. If I go back and refresh, it's gone. If I add another to do, it added it, and the default is still set to false. Cool. Everything is still working. So another thing that you might be thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, this is all great and everything, but how do I mark these as done? And that's what I'd like to talk about next. So in order to do that, we need to update our UI, and I was thinking about just putting a little button beside here that said done and having that handle it. So let's do that. So if you go into your index.mustache file, where we're doing that looping, what we can do is instead of just displaying description and done inside here, let's create a form. Let's create a form. So this form, we will just put everything we had inside here inside there. And let's talk about this for a second. So from above, remember we need to have an action and we need to have a method. So let's create those real quick. Action. And let's just say that it's going to be going to to-dos, something, and I'm going to say completed. Now, let's talk about this something for a second. We have an underscore ID. We can use that underscore ID to pull a document out or to get to a specific document. And we get that underscore ID. If you'll look at this log right here, it showed when we created another to-do that we got the ID back. So we always have this ID, this underscore ID. So the cool thing is I can just come in here, erase that something, and just put underscore ID in. And so now every URL that gets generated will be the to-dos / the underscore ID of the to-do and completed. And we can just send that, we can post that up. So we also need a method, and that is going to be post. We can post that to the server, and then the server can mark it as done. And what I'm expecting is that it will turn from false to true when this occurs. So in order to make all this happen, we need a button. The type is going to be submit. I'm going to make the text done. Close off the button and save it. Let's refresh the page and see if we get our new UI. Yes, so the new user interface is there. I've got these done buttons. That is great. Let's try to use a done button. Ooh, okay. We've seen this before. It says we cannot post to /to-dos / bunch of characters / completed. And that just means that we need to create a route. So let's go create our route to handle marking something as done. Now let's go into our routes file and let's just create a new route. Router.post, and we said that was going to go to /to-dos, and we're going to use a named parameter, so :ID, and then I said the word completed after that. Completed. Pass in a function, request response, and now we should be able to handle that request. So let's just see if we've gotten everything hooked up. All I want to do is do a response redirect back to the page. So what should happen now is we don't see cannot get to, we'll just get redirected back to the home page. Let's go back to the home page. I'm going to hit done, and yes, that's all that happened. We got redirected back to the home page. Cool. So let's validate a couple things here real quick. Let's log. So to get to that ID, so to get to this ID, we're going to use the request.params object. So if I save this and I hit done, and we go check our log, I now should see that we have an ID, and that is the ID that got sent up, and that was in the URL. All of this stuff matches. We can use this ID to go to MongoDB and get a document and toggle whether the item is done or not. So let's do that. Let's do that right now. So I'm going to start off. Let to-do ID equals request.params. And as we saw in the console, I have a property on params called ID that matches this named parameter. And let's talk about a new function that we have not seen yet. To do, if you remember, is our model. This is what we're using to do a find. And that's what brings back all of our records for our index. You can see up here, todo.find. But what I want to do is I want to find this to do by ID, and Mongoose gives us a function called find by ID, and I can just pass in the ID. Now, if any of y'all have been using the MongoDB native driver, you will know that this is not exactly as clean in that library as it is here. So one thing I have to do is tell it to execute. This is what gives us back a promise. One of the things that Mongoose does for you is it provides the ability to create queries over time. And so find by ID is just going to create a query, but it isn't actually going to execute. So to execute the query, I have to use the exec function. Then I get a promise that I can pass in a function that will take back the result. And this is when I get to do some cool stuff here. So result.done is going to be equal to the opposite. So this is just saying not. This is a Boolean, and when I put an exclamation point in front of a Boolean, I just get the opposite of what it was. If this was true, I would get false back. If this were false, I would get true back. And this is how I'm going to handle the toggle. It's actually really cool. Then I'm just going to return result.save. Because when you use find by ID, you get back a you actually get back a Mongoose model that you can do stuff with. So this is actually got a save on it. I can say result.save, and then after the save occurs, I can do my redirect. So let me just take this code down here, get rid of it, put it in there. I'm going to delete this console log because we don't need it anymore. So now, let's see if it works. I'm going to refresh. Server's still running. I'm going to hit done. Hey, and it's marked as true. I can actually toggle this now. That's kind of cool. And again, let me recap the way this works. So when I do a find by ID, I'm passing in the string that I got in from the URL. I am executing that find by ID, and that gives me a promise. Then, once I have the result back, I can flip it to where I say result.done is equal to the opposite of result.done. This is a Boolean, and if you put the not operator or an exclamation point in front of a Boolean, you just get back the opposite of what it was. And then I execute result.save, and save is on the result because I used find by ID to get or to query for the object by ID. Finally, I come down here and everything is great. I do a redirect back to the index. So that's pretty much it for doing the marking of things complete or incomplete. As you can see, it does work. Things are being marked complete or incomplete. And if I mark one as complete, that another to do, if I go in here and refresh, you'll see that done is true, while false is for create more Mongoose videos. Okay. So now there's one final thing that I want to do to finish this to-dos app. And that is, instead of showing everything in this one list, whether anything is to do or not, done or not, I want to separate them into separate lists. So let's kind of take a look at what we would need to do that. I'm going to come down here in my index mustache file and create an H3. And I'll just say that this is done. Just like we did above, I'm going to create a UL. And in that UL, I need to loop through a collection. Let's just call this one done to-dos. And, it's pretty much the same thing as what we had up here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that code down there. Not that I would recommend copying and pasting code all the time, but this literally is the same exact thing that we were going to do up there, except it's just in a different spot. So if I save this, go back over to my page and refresh, I see done, but it doesn't matter if things are done or not, if they don't show up down there. It's not doing it. So let's talk about how we would do this. I'm expecting a property called done to-dos for done ones, and I'm just expecting a property of to-dos for ones that still need to be done. So I can go over into my routes file, and where I'm doing my get, after I've finished my find, I can come down here and let's create a couple of collections. And what we're going to do, I'm going to call these to-dos. And I'm going to say that that is equal to the results. That's just an array. And we have the filter function. And I can pass into there a function that will take all of my to-dos, give me each to-do, and check to see if return to-do. If it's true, actually that's what I want. I want to return if it's not true. So this is a little confusing, but essentially what we're saying is that if the to-do dot done is false, return true. That's what the not operator means. And then I'm going to come down below that and say done to-dos will be equal to results filter, and I will pass in, or I'll just return. And so you may be scratching your head a little bit. How is this working? So filter is just a higher order function, and it takes in a function, and whether and that function gets passed in an item from the array that we're filtering on. And if I return back a true, it gets added to the result of filter. If I return a false, it is discarded and not returned. So when I say that return back all the to-dos that still need to be done, if you remember from earlier, saying not to-do dot done is just going to return true if it's false, and that means that it will get added to that to-dos array, while down here where I'm saying done to-dos, which means that done is true, all I have to do is return done, and then it will be added to the done to-dos. And let's see if this works. So I'm just going to say that to-dos is equal to to-dos, and then I'm going to say done to-dos is equal to done to-dos. Let's refresh the page. Hey, everything is down in the done section. But what happens if I click the done button again? It gets moved back up. This is kind of cool. But you know, having a button here that says done, even though it's in the done list, that doesn't quite make sense. So let's change that. Having a button that says done in the done list doesn't quite make sense. So let's change that. So if we scroll back over to our index.mustache file, I can just come down here and let's just say something like whoops, because if I'm having to put it back up in the not done area, it's probably whoops. So if I click whoops, it goes back up, and if I click done, it goes back down to the done list. As you can see, everything works. So that's pretty much it for this application for now. That's all. Thanks.